When archaeologists talk about seafaring humans, what do they date that to?
The great seafaring adventure that is accepted by archaeology is called the Polynesian expansion. And it's a remarkable story. And that occurs roughly 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. And those Polynesians were amazing ocean navigators. They could cross distances of thousands of kilometers with pinpoint accuracy. I mean, it's not an accident that the Polynesians found Easter Island. Finding Easter Island is a really challenging project. Easter Island is 2,000 miles from the coast of South America. It's 2,000 miles from the nearest other island, which is Tahiti. It's just a little speck in the middle of the ocean, but the Polynesians found it and settled there and appear to have brought a reproductively viable population there and appear to have made voyages back and forth. But that was 3,000 to 3,500 years ago. That was not 12,800 years ago. And this is where archaeology's adamant position that ocean voyaging was begun by the Polynesians and that there was no major ocean voyages before that, I think needs to be strongly questioned, and it needs to be strongly questioned in the light of this DNA evidence from the Amazon rather than rejecting the evidence. An attempt should be made to consider what that might mean.
Well, it's interesting because we know that the Egyptians had boats.
Yeah.
And so, if there were boats 4,500 years ago, why do we think that they didn't try them out in the ocean? That doesn't make any sense, especially if they existed 1,000 years prior, which is also possible.
Archaeologists wouldn't argue that the Egyptians had boats, but that is still within the framework of accepted history. It's the notion of a global navigating culture in the Ice Age that archaeologists can't swallow. It's a subject that I've kept on coming up against over a number of years. I think the best evidence for it is ancient maps, which show the world as it looked during the last ice age. We're talking about maps that were drawn roughly between the 1300s and the 1700s. In other words, in relatively recent history. However, these maps were largely based on much older source maps, which they copied. And we can say that for sure, because one of the famous maps is the Piri Reis map, which was created by a Turkish admiral called Piri Reis in the year 1513. Actually, only a corner of his map has survived. It was originally a world map. We now just have a bit that shows the east coast of South America and North America and the west coast of Africa. Piri Reis writes in that map that it is in his own handwriting that he based it on more than 100 older source maps, some of which had come from the Library of Alexandria. In other words, that maps had been, when the Library of Alexandria had been destroyed in the 4th century AD or whenever it was, some of its contents had been rescued and brought to Constantinople, which became the Turkish capital. And Piri Reis had access to those maps, and he incorporated information from those maps on his maps, as well as incorporating more recent navigational information. And this is one of a whole category of maps which are extremely hard to explain. All of them based on older source maps, now lost. All of them incorporating extremely precise relative longitudes and latitudes. Latitude is not that difficult a technological feat, but longitude is a difficult technological feat. Longitude involves a chronometer. It involves knowing the time at the place you began your voyage and the local noon as well, and calculating the difference between them. You need a chronometer that will keep accurate time at sea with the motions of a ship. And it's just a plain fact that our civilization did not invent such a chronometer until the late 18th century. Before that, we didn't know what longitude we were at, and ships were constantly sailing unexpectedly into coastlines that they thought were hundreds of miles further away. So the discovery of the technique to do longitude was a major civilizational advance. Its presence in maps based on much older source maps that actually show the world as it looks during the last ice age suggests that somebody during the last ice age was mapping the world and had mastered the technique of calculating longitude. Classic example of these maps, and I make a point of this, is what's called the Pinkerton World Map, which was drawn in the year 1818, and it was based on the latest navigational information at that time. I reproduced that map in the book. What's missing from the map, entirely missing, is Antarctica. There's just a hole at the bottom of the world. There's nothing there. The reason that Antarctica is not there is that our civilization hadn't discovered Antarctica in 1818. Oh. So they couldn't authentically put it on a map in 1818. Actually, we discovered it in 1819, and that's when it starts appearing on modern maps. The problem is that Antarctica appears repeatedly on these much older maps, and it appears in the right place and a bit bigger than it is today, but very much as it looked during the last ice age. So what all of this suggests to me is that the world was mapped and explored by a global seafaring culture with a level of technology that was at least equivalent to ours at the end of the 18th century during the ice age.
Wasn't there also a map of Greenland that showed it underneath the ice?
Yes, there are. And another intriguing thing, I mentioned the Piri-Reis map just now. Shown on the Piri-Reis map, lying off the east coast of North America, is a large island with a row of megaliths, like a road of megaliths, running up the middle of it. That island is in the exact place of the Grand Bahama Banks. So this island is sitting there off the southeast coast of North America.
Look at the way they used to draw things back then, too.
And what you see running down the middle of it is this road-like feature of megaliths. I'll point them out again.
I see, right there, yeah.
These here. These here. Now, the thing is, there was a long period of my life when I did a lot of scuba diving, and I was looking at underwater structures. And one of the sites I dived on was the Bimini Road, which is in the Grand Bahama Banks. And the Bimini Road is exactly where that island is. And here's the issue. I don't care whether the Bimini Road is natural or man-made. For me, the mystery is that it is shown above water on that map. And the last time it was above water was thousands and thousands of years ago. So for me, this is all evidence that we shouldn't dismiss the possibility that our ancestors had achieved a level of technology where they could explore and map the world's oceans. We shouldn't dismiss that. And the whole effort of archaeology has been to dismiss the significance of the Bimini Road.
How would they dismiss that?
Well, they say
they
say it's totally natural. I can tell you, I absolutely do not think it's natural. I think it's a man-made structure. But the argument is that it's a kind of beach rock that forms in these blocky formations.
Does it? Is that
yes, beach rock does form in blocky formations. But here I believe that the beach rock has been used as a construction material. But I repeat, the key issue is not whether the Bimini Road is man-made or not. The key issue is that it features on a map above water. I am not looking for us in the past. I am not talking about a civilization that had iPhones and flew to the moon or built rocket ships or Teslas, for example, a high-tech machine civilization. But I am talking about a civilization that had gone much further than others during the Stone Age. And where it had gone, where I derive this from, is the evidence of a knowledge of longitude on ancient maps. Now, longitude are the vertical lines down the map, and latitude is the horizontal. Longitude is a problem that our civilization was unable to solve until the mid-18th century. It was always a risk being out at sea in a sailing ship, and you can't quite calculate the wind speed and the currency. If you say you're sailing from Britain to America, you have no idea at any point exactly how far away you are from the American coast. And it's quite possible in the dead of night, if you've done your calculations wrong, that you're going to crash into that coast and hit it. It was a deadly, deadly problem. It was really important to know where you were at sea. It wasn't until the mid-18th century that Western civilization solved the longitude problem. And in fact, there was a huge prize being offered for anybody who could solve the longitude problem. Well, eventually they did by creating a chronometer which could keep accurate time at sea. But before that, nobody knew where they were in terms of longitude. It was always a rough guess. Columbus didn't even know for sure whether he was going to find a continent on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. But he had reason to believe he would, which touches on these ancient maps that I speak about. There was a sense that there was something there. But he wouldn't have known at any point in his voyage how far west of Greenwich in the UK he was. He wouldn't have had any idea. So knowing longitude was a real huge breakthrough for seafarers in our epoch, for our civilization. But these ancient maps that I'm speaking about, which are in many cases maps that were produced in the 14th, 13th, maybe 15th century, but always based on copies of older source maps now lost. The Orontes Phineas world map is an example. The Piri-Reis map is an example. And many of the maps that are called Portolanos that map the Mediterranean Sea are an example. They all contain extremely accurate relative longitudes. And they should not do so. Even if they were just made in the 14th century and not based on earlier source maps, they shouldn't have relative longitudes, but they do. So that's one reason why I'm pretty confident that the longitude problem was cracked much, much earlier, because some of these maps show the world as it looked during the last ice age. The Orontius Phineas map actually shows Antarctica as well, yet our civilization didn't discover Antarctica until 1820, and there it is on a map from the 1500s. What you're seeing on that map from the mid-1500s is at the very tip of South America and at the very tip of South Africa, you're seeing Antarctica. That's what that huge land, that's South America on the right, and that's the tip of South America, and it's touching an enormous continent. That is Antarctica. And that's a problem, because our civilization did not discover Antarctica until 1820. We had no idea. And there are other maps, the Pinkerton World Map from 1813, say, or roughly 1813. That's how Antarctica is shown on a map.
Non-existent.
It isn't there.
Right.
And that's because it's an honest map.
That's 1818.
Yeah, 1818.
And you said that's because it's an honest map?
It's an honest map because at that time, navigators from our civilization hadn't found Antarctica. So they could only say, they couldn't map it because they hadn't seen it. Okay, that's the thing. That's why there's no Antarctica on this map. But a few years later, 1820, Antarctica is discovered and it starts to appear on maps, but the anomaly is that it appears on these much earlier maps as well, maps based on copies of even older source maps. And that suggests to me that somebody was mapping the world long before us. And furthermore, these maps often show the world amazingly much as it looked during the last ice age. The world was very different during the ice age. Antarctica was much bigger during the ice age than it is today. For example, the Malaysian Peninsula and the Indonesian islands were all joined together into a single landmass that reached almost as far as New Guinea. New Guinea was joined to Australia. This was because sea level was 400 feet lower during the ice age than it is today. The world looked very different, and some of these ancient maps show the world as it looked during the last ice age. If Antarctica is present on ancient maps, then it means that somebody was able to sail the world, to explore the world's oceans, and to map the world's oceans, and furthermore to do so with rather good relative longitudes. That's what I mean when I talk about an advanced civilization, a civilization that had advanced astronomy, that was able to observe the stars, understand the rising and setting points of stars, navigate using stars, and that was able to explore and map the world. Therefore, it had some significant seafaring ability. But I'm not talking about a civilization that had motor cars or airplanes or iPhone. On that Orontius Phineas map, there's a legend written in Latin at the bottom of it, and where the mapmaker boasts about revealing to the world areas that had been hidden in darkness before that. And that sounds to me like ancient maps that had been hidden away and that some had been found.
Yeah.